Hello and welcome back to the Direct Capital channel. Welcome to today's video. Everybody, thank you so much for coming to the live stream. Before yesterday, it was an altcoin TA live stream where I charted all your different coins from what you requested in the live chat, and it was amazing. I had a great time and we charted a lot of coins. If you'd like to check that out, it's in the link in the description down below. It was a free live stream. I had a blast. It was great engagement there. And what better way to celebrate over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, on this YouTube channel, than with an altcoin live TA session. It was great. And speaking of live sessions, I'm very happy to see that you guys want to see more live webinars in the future. Of course, last week on Thursday, we spoke about the Bitcoin halving. We spoke about loads of different things. And that was the first ever webinar. But you guys want to see more webinars, and I'm just thinking, how often should I make these for you guys? I really enjoy that format. It's a great time for engagement and discussion and your questions, and we actually go on a process of discovery together because your questions make me think about the price and about certain phenomena in a different way, and we discover these things together, which is why I really like that format. So I'm more than happy to host another live webinar. But the vote is on now. The poll is on, should I do it once a week, once every 2 weeks, or once every 3 weeks? Or even if you'd like to comment in that tweet, feel free to do so. But if you'd like, feel free to take part in the poll and cast your vote so that we see. Because if things stay as they are on the poll right now, I am going to be hosting a webinar once a week, every Thursday, 7 p.m. UTC. And of course, last time I chose a topic for the Bitcoin halving webinar. This time I'm letting you guys choose the topic for this upcoming webinar. Feel free to leave your comments down below. What would you like to see in the next live webinar? And I'd be more than happy to take the time and spend some time with you and go over that in depth together, answering questions, bouncing around ideas in the live chat of the live webinar. And having said that, let's dive into the video. In this video, we're going to be looking at why Bitcoin could potentially reach 17,000 prior to the halving in a few weeks' time. So this is actually an analysis that we covered together in the webinar last week, in the Bitcoin halving webinar. So if you missed that, fear not, we recorded it. It's in the link in the description down below if you'd like to watch it anytime, any place. So what's going on in this chart? There's a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and do that. These are going to be the halvings, right? Halving 1, halving 2, and halving 3. These are the blue lines which represent each respective halving for Bitcoin. And whenever we look at these orange boxes, they represent the first major correction in a new bull market. So prior to halving 1, this was the bottom, followed by an exponential rally to new yearly highs of $7.50, right? $7.50. And then we saw a very strong correction, which was 47% to the downside. So this was the first major correction in a bull market. And then, of course, we had this higher low build on the weekly, and then we saw price rally towards the upside. So once we saw this purple line become breached, which is essentially the 750 level, right? $7.50. This was the yearly high prior to halving 1. Once we breached that level, we saw a beautiful rally towards the upside to new highs, right? So the 750 high was breached decisively to form a new high, which was around, I think, let's try be rough about this. It was around $16, right? And what we need to bear in mind here is if we zoom in to this particular portion of price action on the weekly, notice how the 50% retrace actually hit the $7.50 level. So this was a resistance right over here, and this became a support right over here. So we get a bottom after an extended bear market. That's the bottom of the market cycle and the beginning of a new market cycle, so a new bull market for Bitcoin. We get that new yearly high at $7.50, and then we get that first major correction in the bull market, which is around 47%, followed by this weekly higher low. And then we see that recovery, we see a breakout past this previous high, and then we see new highs relative to these highs right over here. In this case, it's 112% gain to the upside. And after we see those new highs, we see a strong correction prior to the halving. And this green circle represents that pre-halving correction, something I talked about in my Bitcoin halving article in so much more detail. And after this pre-halving retrace, we see a recovery for Bitcoin. And then, of course, after the halving, we see exponential gains in Bitcoin's price action. So those are the few things that I'd like you guys to bear in mind when looking at the next halvings. Because it's exactly copy-paste, right? So we see the extended bear market right over here. Price bottoms at around this level, right? But if you'd really like to be picky, you can say that this was the bottom. The candle closed right over here. In any case, this was roughly the bottom for Bitcoin in that market cycle. So it is an accumulation period. So it is a little bit of a different bottom compared to the one, if we zoom out over here. This was a more volatile bottom. This over here was an accumulation phase, so more gradual. Bargain hunters were stepping in slowly but surely, accumulating a little bit every time, producing rallies, and of course troughs happened afterwards, pullbacks. But fundamentally, once we broke out of this accumulation range, we had a new bull market for Bitcoin. And once we got that new bull market, we reached a new high of around, let's see what's that number, $505, right? So that's the new high in that early bull market. So we see that new high of around $500 followed by a retrace towards this level right over here. So that's a 40% retrace right over here. So prior to halving one, that first major correction was 47%, right? The orange box, this was a 47% correction. This was a 40% correction. And in both cases, we saw the weekly high-low become respected, just like over here. This black uptrending line is respected right over here. It's showing us that people want to buy Bitcoin at a premium after that first major bull market correction. So right over here, that's the beginning of the higher low, but then people won't let price go down any lower. We just start to see uptrending because people want to buy at a premium every time Bitcoin dips a little bit more, with a little bit more force. Every time Bitcoin dips, we tend to see this sort of premium buying. It's only a few weeks before the halving that we see a breakout past this old yearly high of $500. And once we see that breakout, we see a new yearly high prior to the halving. But then we see a 38% correction before this halving, and this correction continues into the halving and even a little bit after the halving. But the technical thing that I'd like you to pay attention to, because it's really important, is that this was a previous resistance and this is now a new support. So every time in these past two instances, whenever we see, number one, a breakout past a previous resistance on the pre-halving retrace, we see a test of that into a new support. We've seen that over here, and we've seen that over here as well. Let me just zoom out and zoom in just to make that a little bit clearer. Right, so we see a breakout past $500, a new high, and then a retrace of around 38, in this case it was 38% before. Prior to halving one, it was 50%. So it's around 38-50% retrace. And we always see this over here, this previous resistance turn into a new support. Fantastic stuff to just see these recurring tendencies in Bitcoin's price action. But before we move on to halving 3, I'd like to just show you that every time we break past an old resistance and then we get that new yearly high, prior to halving one, it was a 112% rally to the upside. And once we saw this resistance of $500, once we saw that break to the upside, we saw a new yearly high 56% later. So a declining tendency over here. So we're seeing a declining tendency by a factor of 2. So once we saw this yearly high get breached, 112% to the upside. Once we saw this yearly high get breached, 56% to the upside. So 112% divided by 2 is 56%. So it is declining by a factor of 2. Right, lots of information there, guys. I hope you guys are staying with me. I'm trying to be as concise as possible. There's a lot to break down in this chart, and I've spoken about this and so much more on different sort of analyses and different forms of analyses in my previous Bitcoin halving webinar. So if you'd like to watch it at any time, check it out in the description down below. But when we're talking about all these different tendencies and all these different things that are recurring in Bitcoin's price action, let's try and extrapolate that to what's going on right now in Bitcoin's price action. So we see the bottom over here. This has an accumulation period. This is the accumulation period and bottoming out phase following that the devastating bear market, which most of us will remember. This is the accumulation period. Once we break out past this accumulation period, we see that first rally in a new bull market. And then, of course, this is the new yearly high, 13,900. And then we see that first major correction in the bull market. So it's 54%. So comparing all of these different corrections, 47%, 40%, 54%. This was the harshest first major correction in a new bull market, but it was nonetheless a major correction in the bull market, because many people thought this was the beginning of a new bear market, but that's just not what we're seeing in the charts prior to the halving. So we see that 54% retrace, and what is nice to see is that we see a higher low tendency develop on the weekly chart as well. So this is something going back to what we're seeing over here, higher lows, higher lows. So people are buying at a premium. They're buying at a premium, and my expectation based on previous price tendencies prior to the halving and everything we've spoken about in this video so far is that Bitcoin is going to most likely rally past 13,900, that old yearly high, and it's going to make a new high prior to the halving. And then, of course, we'll see that retrace. So if we zoom out, we have a declining factor. We have these rallies declining by a factor of 2, 112%, 56%. So I'm going to just say that we're going to continue seeing this declining tendency and just put 28%. So once we see a breach past the old yearly high, 13,900, we're going to see something around 17,000, 17,500, 800, something around those levels, but that's going to be in keeping with historical price tendencies for Bitcoin prior to the halving. So once we see this 13,900 level become breached, 28% to the upside afterwards to reach 17,000 is in line with historical tendencies. So that's going to be interesting to see. But also we have to bear in mind that we'll see a pre-halving retrace, because every time this green circle right over here represents that pre-halving retrace. And what we need to bear in mind is every time we saw this pre-halving retrace, we've seen a test of that old resistance, right? That old high, that yearly high, is tested into a new support. So we saw that here, and of course we saw that right over here as well, right? Because old resistance here to make the new yearly high and new support over here before rallying to the upside. So what I'm expecting after we hit 17,000, which is a 28% rally towards the upside after breaching this yearly high, we could see a correction of around from 17,000 all the way back to 13,900 to test it as a new support. The question we have to answer ourselves though, is that a strong enough retrace in line with the historical tendencies? So pre-halving retraces are around 38% to 50%. So a retrace from 17,000 to 13,900, that's not that impressive really. To be honest, that's not really a strong retrace. That would be around a 20% retrace from 17,000 to 13,900. And is that deep enough? Is it really deep enough for Bitcoin to just go through a 20% retrace prior to the halving and then rally onwards? That remains to be seen, but here's another idea as to what we could potentially expect. This would go slightly against the grain of history, but nonetheless, it is important to bear in mind that sometimes price likes to respect not the top of wicks like it has been doing throughout Bitcoin's history prior to the halving, but it could maybe want to respect the top of the candles. So this is of course a resistance. This isn't the new yearly high, right? Because this is the wick that made that new yearly high on the weekly. But what if Bitcoin needs to retrace more than 20% from 17,000 and actually retrace around 35% to these candle bodies right around here, which are actually representing a very strong resistance for Bitcoin going forward right now. So that's around 11,700. So if we breach past that level, it's going to be a very easy way towards 16,000, 17,000 for Bitcoin, in my opinion, because this is a very strong resistance area. In any case, that remains to be seen. But one last thing that I'd like to leave you with before the end of this video is that we're talking about all these different pre-halving retraces. Well, let's have a look at where we are in the market cycle for altcoins. So at the moment, we have, of course, recovered from depression a while ago when Ethereum was back at, I think it was $80. I can't remember what the Ethereum bottom was. But after that bottom, for altcoins, we saw advancing. So altcoins have recovered from the depression phase a while back. And ever since then, we've seen advancing in their market cycle. And it's been very subtle until only a few weeks ago where altcoins have just started popping off left and right. So we're in the process of this advancing period right over here. Most people can't believe that it's alt season, when in fact it is, and that's what this phase is characterized by. We're seeing a lot of advancing price action across altcoins, but this is fundamentally the disbelief phase. And the thing with an advancing period in price action for altcoins leading up to the disbelief phase, so we're not in that phase per se, we're only approaching it, because part of that disbelief phase is that retrace right over here. We see all this advancing from the depression phase all the way here, and then we see that retrace. And it's this retrace that's depicted right over here. And we see a volatile buy up. And what I'm just trying to hint to you guys is that the disbelief phase has that period of advancing followed by a retrace. And that retrace is going to tie in with the Bitcoin pre-halving retrace. We're going to see a market-wide retracement period during that time, a few weeks prior to the Bitcoin halving itself. And we're going to see a market-wide correction followed by a lovely recovery to just enjoy the rest of the bull market as Bitcoin makes astronomical gains and altcoins make even more impressive gains following Bitcoin in its footsteps. So that's something to bear in mind. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you'd like to see more content like this, and of course subscribe for future videos. I'm more than happy to be producing this content for you guys on a daily basis here on YouTube, as long as you guys find value in that. So let me know if you guys like the content. Leave a like, subscribe for future content, and of course leave your ideas down below in the comments as to what you'd like to see in the next live webinar, most likely next week, because you guys want me to run these once a week, so I'm more than happy to do that. But let's decide together on that topic, so leave your ideas in the comments down below. And having said that, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you soon.